Board of Paper tells me to, Mr. Clerk. Only 14 seconds late, thanks to my advice, my very dear and ancient friend and clerk. Welcome to this debate considering E-petition 324092, and I call on Chris Evans to propose the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. I beg to move that this House has considered E-petition 324092 relating to black history and cultural diversity in the curriculum. This petition calls on the government to teach Britain's colonial past as part of the UK's compulsory curriculum. It has received over 240,000 signatures. This petition was started by Gibb MP Pearson and Nell Bevan. The petition arrived on the parliamentary website on the 10th of June 2020, and within 48 hours it received the threshold of 100,000 signatures. The speed at which this petition met the threshold for debate shows the strength of feeling across our country that this change is necessary and urgent. There are multiple petitions covering similar subjects, and the committee has taken this issue on as one of our key projects for the year. The creators of the petition, which called to add education on diversity and racism to all school curriculums and to make the UK curriculum more inclusive of BAME history, have also given evidence to the committee. Holding hearings in partnership with the Women and Equality Select Committee, we have heard from a wide variety of sources in this field, from the Education Minister to school children themselves. I want to credit the Chair, the member for Newcastle upon Tyne North, for her commitment to this review. I'm so pleased these series of petitions rightfully gained so much support from the public. This has allowed the committee to investigate an area I have long been passionate about, and that is diversifying and improving our historical teaching in this country. Mr. Gray, I must also declare an interest as the Chair of the History and Archives All-Party Parliamentary Group, and I'm also an honorary fellow of the University of Wales Trinity St David's. As I said, I am passionate about history, and above all, the way it is taught. It amazes me that we are so narrow in our curriculum. For me, many years ago at GCSE history, there was Adolf Hitler's Germany, which we studied, then Crime and Punishment, which was mainly about Jack the Ripper, and then we did the Arab-Israeli conflict, and that was it. I then did my A-levels, and we did the Tudors and the Civil War, Oliver Cromwell, Charles I, and all that. Our curriculum is just far too narrow, Mr. Gray. It is easy for the government to point to the option of teaching ideas, political power, industry and empire, Britain 1745 to 1901 as an option. However, it is not mandatory. It is only one of many topics which can be chosen by schools and their teachers. It is clear the signatories of this petition do not feel this is enough, and I feel I must agree with them. The committee found that 45% of primary school teachers and 64% of secondary school teachers who responded to our survey strongly disagreed with the statement that the national curriculum ensures that students in my school experience have a balanced range of ethnically and culturally diverse role models. Our inquiries have also shown that far too often these subjects are not being taught because teachers lack confidence and, above all, proper training. 1 in 4 teachers told us they lack confidence in their ability to develop their pupils' understanding of black history and cultural diversity, with 86% calling particularly for specialised in-school training to help address this. This is leaving students unprepared when they reach degree level, which continues a cycle of a lack of confidence within the subject. Dr. Deanna Heath, who teaches Southern Asian, Imperial, Colonial and Global History at the University of Liverpool, said, "I face an uphill struggle at the start of each new academic year. Many of the undergraduates who greet me know virtually nothing about any of the subjects I teach. While some black and BAME history is now taught in schools, it is far too narrow in scope. Most students' experience of racial history up until A-levels is incredibly American-centric. Students learn about American slavery and the Black Civil Rights Movement. Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and even my great hero Muhammad Ali, are now studied at GCSE by many pupils. However, very little black British history is. When students learn about the transatlantic slave trade, Britain's role in this is often simplified or just a small part of their study. Few secondary school students learn about British slave plantations or slave ships. Even fewer learn how British involvement in the global slave trade shaped domestic economics, politics, empire building and industrialisation. Black British history has largely been forgotten from the UK curriculum, even though there have been Black Britons since the Roman times. While students might have a chance to learn about the Montgomery bus boycotts in Alabama, they often do not learn about the history of bus boycotts much closer to home. In Bristol in 1963, there was a successful bus boycott following the refusal of the Bristol Omnibus Company to hire black or Asian bus crew. Many in the UK will know the name Rosa Parks, but not enough know the name Paul Stevenson. On the same day in 1963, Martin Luther King gives that iconic I Have a Dream speech from the steps of the Washington Capitol. The British Omnibus Company announced there would be no more discrimination in the employing of bus crews. I suspect we feel more comfortable looking at discrimination perpetuated by Americans than we do taking a closer look at our own history. We cannot continue to whitewash the UK's past. Students must be taught a nuanced and honest view of British history. British and European history studied at GCSE and A-level all too often seems to be a history of white, powerful men. History curriculums, especially until students reach university, are too frequently studies of monarchs, politicians, and military leaders. This creates an often Eurocentric, white, male, and upper or middle class view of what history and knowledge is. This is not a full history of Britain, Europe, or the world. The roles of working classes, of minorities, of women, and all those who have been underrepresented have not been granted the historical significance they deserve. Not only is teaching such a narrow view of history a disservice to the subject, it makes history itself far less accessible. Students in British secondary schools are often too far removed from the Churchills, the Napoleons, or the Henry VIII of the past. A diverse curriculum is necessary to provide new entry points into history and new standpoints which we can understand our past and the world we currently live in. The few women who feature in our curriculums are either painted as exceptional to their sex, such as Florence Nightingale, radicals such as the suffragettes, or monarchs such as Elizabeth I and Queen Victoria. Very few non-white women are mentioned in history textbooks for secondary school students. Mary Seacole is one of these very few. Studies of women like Seacole must be encouraged to recognise the diversity of Britain's past and the importance of such diversity. But unfortunately, this has taken too long to occur. William Howard Russell, a war correspondent for the Times, wrote in 1857 that he hoped England would not forget Seacole as the one who nursed her sick, who sought out her wounded to aid and secure them, and who performed the last offices for some of her illustrious dead. That this seems to be exactly what happened for many years. In 2016, a statue to Seacole was erected just across the river from this place, and I urge anybody, when the lockdown measures are brought down, just go over and see that wonderful statue to that wonderful woman. It took 12 years to raise the funds required and should be a symbol of pride in a black British heroine. Unfortunately, I have to say, even my little act of posting a photograph of me on Twitter resulted in some terrible abuse about the role of Mary Seacole. This has no place in society and amazes me. Somebody who did so much for the people she looked after was actually questioned whether she was a nurse or not. This has to stop. Mary Seacole should be celebrated as an influential figure of British history. Her story and the racism she faced ought to be taught widely in history curriculums, but we also must make sure that she does not stand alone. The history of Britain is incredibly diverse, Mr. Gray, and curriculum should reflect this. It is not enough to pick one figure from history. The diversity of Britain and the way that attitudes to and experiences of race, sex, sexuality, disability, or class have shaped history is vital for our understanding today. Ultimately, this all matters because the impact it's having on young people. A report from Paul Campbell, lecturer in sociology at the University of Leicester, found that the lack of sufficiently diverse or decolonised curriculum and faculty mean it was often difficult for Black students to be able to connect content and assessments directly to their own lived realities. He found the students were multiply disadvantaged and have to work harder than their peers to connect with both assessment and curriculum content. The lack of diversity in our curriculum can be found throughout our education system. Although this petition is focused on history, it is equally true of the likes of English literature and other subjects. The Black curriculum, one of the leading charities in this field, say that aim is to provide a sense of belonging and identity to young people across the UK. To me, this is the whole point of the debate. It's our duty to get this right, so all students see themselves represented in education. Thank you very much.
The question is, this House considered E-petition 324092 relating to Black history and cultural diversity in the curriculum. Bell Ribeiro Addy.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, and I want to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Iserlohn, and please excuse me if I've said that wrong, for securing this debate today. I know that previously, I believe it was the year before last, that no subject had actually received more signatories for parliamentary petition than those surrounding Black history, and that being taught as part of our national curriculum, and that is certainly continuing with the petition we are discussing today. And I'm not surprised, because when it comes to Black history, we are not given a complete picture. When it comes to British history, we are not given a complete picture, because Black history is so often missing from this, and the history of our slavery and colonialism in the past is quite often missing. And how can we truly understand this country as it is if we do not address those issues? Like most people who've grown up in the UK over the past century, I never learnt very much about it, and what I did was self-taught. And the majority of the information you find is about the US civil rights struggle. And these international perspectives are very important. However, it was far too long before I discovered the UK's own rich civil rights history and all of the information that relates to our role in the slave trade and colonialism. And I want children in our country to learn about these things, to learn about why our country is the way it is today, and why they may, if they are Black or Asian or from an ethnic minority, experience discrimination today, and to learn about important figures like William Coufay and Mary Seacole, CLR James, Claudia Jones, Olive Morris, and so many more. I can't stress how damaging it is not to see yourself reflected in what you learn and what you learn in your history. Now, our governments seem quite obsessed at the moment about patriotism and having children sing certain songs in schools, etc. But when you're constantly made to feel like you don't belong because of rhetorics around immigration, and when that's reinforced by what you learn, or rather what you don't learn, that can be extremely damaging. Now, my first Black relative born in the UK was actually born in 1806 in Twyford in Winchester. His name was Thomas Birch Freeman. He was the son of a freed slave and a maid. He went on to become a Methodist minister and eventually settled in Ghana, but often travelled between Ghana, Nigeria, and the UK. And when I read about his history, I don't hear how strange it was for a Black man to be walking around in the UK at that time. Black people have been a part of this country for hundreds of years, but far too often people today are made to feel like it's very, very recent, in the past 50 or 60 years, and that they are still very much migrants. Now, we also know that history is always written by the victors, and that's one obvious explanation for the status quo in terms of how we learn at the moment. The historical amnesia surrounding our country's own civil rights struggle and the slavery and colonialism that came before has a pretty blatant function in our political discourse, I think, because obscuring the past victories of the oppressed and marginalized doesn't help prevent it from being repeated. Now, people often refer to this sort of teaching as decolonizing our curriculum, and I think it's important to note that it's as much about class as it is about race. In school, we have other notable gaps in our history lessons about struggles that were ended. For example, the miners' strikes, the poll tax riots, and the accomplishments of trade unions. The attempt to put the history of slavery and colonialism and Black civil rights in the UK into the curriculum is an attempt to put the history of working classes onto the curriculum. And it's very, very key to note that. And I worry that there is an ideological reason behind resisting, despite how we can see from this petition, and petitions gone past, just how many people want to see it as part of the curriculum. Because if working class kids learn about movements for change, and if they learn about just how much power they have as citizens, what's to stop them from recognizing the parallels about what's going on in the present, and more so what's to stop them from mounting effective challenges and bringing about change. Now, I've touched on the Black history generally, and we know that this is usually confined to a month, and that month is really a means to an end, because what the end has to be is actually giving everybody a very clear picture of our collective past, and that's why we cannot keep confining it to that 1 month. too much of the burden falls on busy teachers who often, and this is coming from information that was given to us as part of the Women in Select Committee, don't necessarily feel confident in teaching certain subjects, and there is not much support from the government in that way. And I think the government should be taking a lead from brilliant teachers that do all of the work themselves, and organisations like the Black Curriculum, the Coalition of Anti-Racist Educators, and the Black Educators Alliance. Issues of race, it feels, and when we touch on subjects that have to do with issues of race, are always treated completely differently. And I think that's wrong. In that it's always treated as if you want to talk about race, you are taking away from talking about something else. And that's the essence of racism in itself. I've heard far too often people reducing the idea that we should teach slavery and colonialism in schools as nonsense, and that all it's doing is reinforcing the idea that at some point people in our country did something wrong, and taking children away from learning other more important things. And I can't understand why, and I can't understand why some cannot see why, how, and just how important it is for people to learn about these issues so that we don't repeat them, so that we do understand where discrimination comes from. And confronting the history of slavery and empire isn't about past recrimination. We really do just need to address our shameful past in order to understand why we're living our shameful present, and eventually, hopefully, change what we see in terms of a future, and move to a future of equality. Now, in order to do this, we need to understand that it's going to start with education, because nobody is born racist. It's absolutely in what we learn. And if racism is ignorance, and I'm sure all members would agree with that, then what is education if not the absence of ignorance? If we teach these very, very important parts of our history, I really do believe it will change our discourse, and it will change the rhetoric and some of the shameful things we hear currently. So I wholeheartedly support this petition, and I hope the government takes yet another petition on board that has been very, very clear about what we need to see in our curriculum. Thank you.
John Nicholson.
Thank you very much. Children have to be taught prejudice. I agree with that. We know it doesn't come naturally to them. We all know too that the best way to deal with discrimination and promote inclusion is through education. And yet for much of our history, prejudice was instilled at school. Children were taught that one religion was better than another. They were taught harmful myths about gay people. They were explicitly taught that the white race was superior, and that colonialism had a benign, civilizing influence on foreign, faraway peoples who could only benefit from our interference. Bile instilled in children and taken forward to adulthood. Horrible views entrenched. The teaching curriculum has moved on since then, but does it do enough to address lasting legacies? Almost 1/3 of children have heard racist comments at school, according to research by the anti-bullying campaign, the Diana Awards, with most having experienced it by their 13th birthday. Prejudice may no longer be taught, but are its root causes sufficiently addressed? And here, Black history is surely key. When I was growing up, I was taught in American history books that Africa had no history, and neither did I. That I was a savage about whom the less said, the better, who had been saved by Europe and brought to America. And of course, I believed it. I didn't have much choice. Those were the only books that there were. The late, great James Baldwin said that at the Cambridge Union in 1965. And when I was at school, me, John Nicholson, when I was at school in the 1970s, we were taught that Europeans discovered America and Australia and New Zealand, barren wildernesses before our arrival. And while we knew about the evils of slavery, few of us, until recently, understood how deeply immersed Scotland had been in the trade. We'd wiped the dark period from our collective national memory. But our streets held the clue: Wilson Street and Plantation Street, Jamaica Street and Buchanan Street in Glasgow alone. We do far too little to learn about and teach our legacy. That's why I've welcomed the debate about statues and context. It's an opportunity for all, whatever our backgrounds, to reflect on the physical legacy which surrounds us. It's an opportunity to engage with the public, whether the Cecil Rhodes statue at Oriel College, Oxford, or Edward Colson's statue in Bristol. We have, as one writer put it, begun to search our soul as nations on these islands. That's why, too, I was so disappointed, I confess, to read about the UK Culture Secretary's intervention at the Museum of the Home in Shoreditch. Formerly the Jeffrey Museum, it was renamed in light of Sir Robert Jeffrey's record as a slaver. The museum went on to consult visitors and local people about whether they wanted Jeffrey's statue to remain at the entrance or to be brought indoors and contextualized. Over 2,000 people responded, the majority supporting removal and context. But the Secretary of State stepped in, overruled the museum director, threatening her with a budget cut if she honoured the consultation results. Deeply inappropriate intervention by a politician in a museum's legitimate work, I think. Unthinkable from a culture secretary in Cardiff or Edinburgh, where academic and curator freedom is respected. The right-wing press and some politicians tried to present this debate as pride in our history versus national shame. But that's surely far too crude. What we must do is attempt to put into context the actions of Britain abroad and the effect that this had on other nations and peoples. Inextricably linked to this debate is the history of people of colour in the UK and the massively undervalued contribution they have made over many centuries. When we teach a history that is disproportionately white or which whitewashes our crimes, it means two things. Not only the children of colour will have fewer role models or people with whom they can identify, but also it entrenches the stereotype that exclusively white people made our nations what they are today. The next generation shows so much promise. They're more accepting than our generation was of diversity. They're far more aware of racism, sexism, and homophobia. Let us help them by teaching history which accurately reflects our role in the world, how we got here, and how every group contributed to the countries we are today. Thank you.
Claudia Webb. Claudia, did you catch that?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gray, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship. I also congratulate the Honourable Member Hazelwood for securing this important debate. I also pay tribute and congratulate the almost 270 people, 70,000 people who signed the important petition that led to this debate, including hundreds of Leicester East residents. Across the world, racism and the far right are on the rise, and it has never been more important for us to learn from the history of racial oppression and to end the injustices that exist to this day. In the Black Lives Matter movement, we've rightly seen renewed public calls for our schools to teach the true, brutal history of the British Empire and the legacy of imperialism, colonialism, and racism, which continue today have a generational impact. The national curriculum currently omits the vast contributions that people have made to the UK and the ongoing legacy of Britain's imperial history, and in reality, Black history is taught in only 10% of all schools. To remedy this, the government must adopt the calls from the National Education Union for a review of the curriculum and teacher training and a strategy to make new entrants to the teaching profession significantly more diverse over the next 4 years. These are not new demands. In 1999, the Stephen Lawrence inquiry called for changes to the national curriculum to help tackle racism and combat racism in our institutions, including making Black history mandatory. Now, I support the mandatory teaching of Black history and specifically including Black histories on the national curriculum from Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 4. I congratulate the Welsh Government in making Black history mandatory to all its schools. They understand by educating on the events of the past, we can forge a better future. As argued by the Runnymede Trust, national curriculum should be one that applies to all schools, regardless of status, to prevent some from opting out. Currently, free schools and academies do not need to follow the national curriculum. A standing need for these improvements to the curriculum were underlined in March 2020, when the Windrush Lessons Learned Review recommended that the government tell the stories of empire, Windrush, and its legacy. Research by Teach First found that many pupils in UK schools will not have studied any novels or plays by authors who are not white. This shows how much more needs to be done to ensure all pupils can access a diverse curriculum. As we reflect on the Black Lives Matter movement, it's crucial to recognise that the United Kingdom has been central to the historical subjugation of Black people. It is estimated that until the Abolition of Slavery Act in 1833, Britain transported some 3.1 million Africans, around 25% of all slaves, to its colonies. When the British Empire did abolish slavery in 1807, it provided 46,000 slave owners with today's equivalent of 17 billion, 40% of its national budget. The British government only paid off its obligation to former slave-owning families and organisations in 2015. Until then, British taxpayers were amongst those who have been paying compensation to those that imprisoned our ancestors. And they are amongst those still paying the price today with the slow and inadequate support offered to victims of racialized state violence, including the Grenfell Tower disaster and the Windrush generation. Present-day global inequalities remain permanently shaped by the horrors of extractive colonialism and racialized subordination. Former colonial powers must begin to recognize and repair the historical damage upon which their prosperity was built. To give just one example, the unacceptable instances of appalling murder and violence at the hands of the British state have been erased from British Day memory of empire. Nowhere is this clearer than in Kenya. There is a collective amnesia in the United Kingdom regarding British torture camps in 1950s Kenya. 1950s Kenya. I say that again because this is recent history, where members of the Kikaya tribe were systematically tortured, starved, beaten, mistreated, and raped, as well as the massacre of the Sota people, where 1,800 men, women, and children were murdered in a colonial land grab. Across Kenya, Africa, and other regions, forced to endure the injustice of colonialism, indigenous communities were systematically alienated from their rightful lands. Yet these massacres have been airbrushed from British history. The brutality of modern racism in the UK cannot be separated from this history. The perverse legacy continues to affect us in all walks of life, from police use of force to unfair immigration detentions to the disproportionate number of Black children who go to bed hungry. If we are to end the scourge of institutional racism and the destructive legacy of colonialism, it is vital that children and young people are taught the true history. It is therefore essential that the government abandons its crusade against the reality of institutional racism. This administration is underpinned by a deeply troubling broader political project which is designed to divide working class communities against each other and distract from the real causes of inequality and injustice. While the government must recognise that they risk being on the wrong side of history, they must abandon their divisive culture wars and commit to introducing an accurate and diverse curriculum. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Vera Hobbs.
Thank you, Mr. Gray, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. History is written by the winners. However uncomfortable, however painful, we have a responsibility to confront the whole history of our nation, not only the things that are easy to celebrate. We must learn from the parts about which we are disturbed and ashamed. Most importantly, we need to recognize that the history of the transatlantic slave trade has thrown a very long shadow, and that we are still living with the legacy of the injustices committed long ago and indeed not so long ago. Learning from our past should create a better future. We cannot hope to reach a place of true racial equality without having the difficult conversations around our colonial past. Education is a valuable tool to empower young people to make change happen. We have a duty to ensure that the next generation better understands historical injustices and the way those injustices still play out in our society today. Teaching Black history and the histories of other ethnicities and cultures adds an important layer to our overall understanding. This does not mean erasing someone else's history, far from it. Including more in our history books can only be more enriching. I find it hard to understand why some people feel threatened by this. Last Friday evening, I had the honor of chairing a discussion panel exploring Bath Abbey's historical connections with slavery and empire. The event coincides with the Abbey's exhibition on the same topic, and I would encourage anyone visiting Bath to see this fascinating exhibition. Bath Abbey has more monuments than any other parish church in our country. Some of those praise the achievements of those connected with the slave trade, and I commend Bath Abbey for bravely confronting the legacy of its history and how we should respond sensitively today. The speakers at this moving and thought-provoking event last Friday taught us so much. Two speakers recounted their and their parents' lived experiences of arriving in the UK from the Commonwealth and the indignities they were subjected to. Sadly, they were not alone. Irvin Campbell, chairman of the local charity Stand Against Racism, told us that the only time Black history was mentioned when he was a pupil was when the diagram of a slave ship was shown. The richness of Black history has been left out of our school curriculum. We need to rectify this. Irvin taught me to use the term enslaved instead of slave. To call someone a slave robs them of their innate dignity. He has spoken at schools about the proud history of African culture, their kings and their queens, and he has watched young people swell with pride as they learn about their history. Education has a hugely important role to play in ending institutional racism and closing inequalities in the UK. Our curriculum must be broadened, and where these topics are currently covered, reviewed. And we must ensure that teachers have the resources and training they need to deliver an honest, open, inclusive curriculum so that we see real progress in schools. One of our Bath Abbey speakers read a poem by Steve Turner, which still echoes in my mind. History repeats itself. Has to. No one listens. Let us have the courage to share all of our collective history. In doing so, we have the opportunity to show that we do listen and that maybe history doesn't repeat itself. Thank you.
Afzal Khan.
Thank you, Chair. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. May I begin by thanking my honourable friend for bringing this important debate. The people of Manchester Gorton care deeply about the issue of diversity in education, as is shown in the fact that over 1,000 of them signed the petition for today's debate. The strength of feelings on this issue in Manchester and right across the country must be a signal to government that now is the time for truly radical overhaul of the national curriculum and to ensure it considers the histories, lives, and experiences of all people. Towards the end of the last year, working in collaboration with the Black curriculum, I launched a new diverse curriculum charter for schools across my constituency. This charter is backed by Manchester City Council, Runnymede Trust, Kids of Colour, Impact of a Mission, the Equality Act Review, as well as a host of trade unions. The charter was developed off the back of the many conversations I had following the eruption of the global Black Lives Matter protest and wider concerns around the systemic racism in our country raised last year. Racism is still a fact of life, and across the UK, young people today are still growing up in a society plagued by inequality. Education has the power to change lives, and it holds the key to raising a new, truly anti-racist generation of our young people. This is why ensuring it reflects the experiences of all people in our society is so important. Too often, the current curriculum eliminates or misrepresents the contributions of Black, Asian, and minority ethnic communities in Britain. We gloss over colonialism and depict racism as a historical artifact rather than a current and lived reality, and in doing so, we fail our young people. There has been a fantastic enthusiasm in Manchester Gorton for the diverse curriculum charter, and many schools have already undertaken important work in addressing diversity and inclusivity in their curriculum. While this enthusiasm and drive from local schools is incredibly welcome, we must be under no illusion that this is not enough. Without concerted government action and to embed diversity and anti-racism at every level of our education system, all our children will miss out on learning about the wonderful richness of our society. Thank you.
Peter Kyle.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. It is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I'd like to also thank the honourable member, my honourable friend, the member for Islwyn, for securing the debate based on 270,000 people who signed the E-petition. It is a credit to them that we are having this debate here today. I also like to start by quoting the Schools Minister, who isn't here with us today, but we have been upgraded with the honourable member for Chichester, who is a fellow Sussex MP. But back in 2014, the Schools Minister did say, when he was speaking to the Association of School and College Leaders under the subject of the importance of the curriculum, the following. In his words, "We all know the cliche of older generations asking their children or their grandchildren, why don't they teach you that at school? We are determined to allow the children of tomorrow to answer such inquisitions. Yes, in fact, they do." Now, I think that we should think very carefully before constructing a curriculum that's based on the schooling of yesteryear. Let's not forget that it was a Conservative government that passed Section 28. This banned the teaching of LGBT issues within schools until it was repealed by the last Labour government. Just because some things were taught in the past doesn't mean that the same things should be taught in the same way today. For that reason, it is essential that we keep the curriculum under continual review and that we ask ourselves some simple questions today. Is the curriculum equipping our kids with the knowledge and tools they need to prosper once they leave school? Is it preparing our children for life, building tolerant citizens that embody the values that we as a country aspire to? And does it reflect the brilliant and diverse history of our country, avoiding narrow interpretations of our national story at the expense of a bigger, more significant truth? As today's petition makes clear, generations of young people are leaving school without an informed, balanced understanding of our past. There is no requirement on schools to teach our colonial history, nor are they required to recognise the role that this has played in perpetuating barriers to many black and minority ethnic people enjoying all of the opportunities that life in modern Britain offers. Not only is this holding people back, it is a moral scar on our society that is failing to heal. Labour would introduce such a requirement, building a diverse curriculum, including content focused on Britain's role in the transatlantic slave trade and colonialism. In Labour-run Wales, the government has already committed to introducing this from September 2022, and this shows what Labour in power can and is doing. But it is not about trashing Britain's history. It is about celebrating it. As the author of today's petition states, by educating on the events of the past, we can forge a better future. The Labour Party believes that a diverse and complete curriculum is one of the best tools we have in our armoury to build the future we all want to see. A just future, a fair future, a future in which every individual, regardless of their race and ethnicity, feels as if they have a stake in the country we all call home. How can a young person be benefited by missing out on the learning of the Bristol bus boycott in 1963, the 15,204 men serving in the British West Indies Regiment in the First World War, Mary Prince, the first black woman to write an autobiography in British history, Mary Seacole, the historic nurse from the Crimean War, and Walter Tull, the Tottenham Hotspur striker and the first mixed-race heritage infantry officer in a regular British Army regiment. Yet research by Teach First found pupils could complete their entire GCSE without studying a single work by a non-white author. Teaching about black scientists, authors, and change makers will inspire a new generation. After all, you cannot be what you cannot see. The murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement were watershed moments that demanded real change. That need for change was only accelerated by COVID. Baroness Lawrence's report for Labour highlighted how black, Asian and minority ethnic people have been left overexposed, underprotected and overlooked throughout the pandemic. Instead, the government contented itself with publishing an insulting document downplaying the role of institutional racism and constructing a false binary between race and class. The Tories want to tell us they are interested in ending class and regional inequalities, but in reality, they aren't interested in ending inequality at all. After all, it wasn't white privilege that closed thousands of Sure Starts, early years and youth centres, it was Tory cuts. And as for the 9% fall in real terms funding for schools and policies leading to record levels of child poverty and food bank use, the Conservatives did all of that on their own as well. No amount of cultural provocation can hide the facts. Labour is listening to the lived experience of black, Asian and ethnic minority people. We will introduce a Race Equality Act tackling racism at its root, including through proper education about our colonial past. And we will implement the reviews of the government has failed to implement itself. Both the Macpherson and the Windrush Lessons Learnt review called for action on education, but it has been conspicuously absent. This government will hide its lack of interest in tackling racism behind any cloak it can. Only Labour can tackle racism root and branch, and that must begin with the breadth of information and sensitive teaching we offer our young people. Thank you, Mr. Gray.
Thank you, Chair, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. And I would also like to thank the many people who signed this petition and also congratulate the Honourable Member for Islwyn for securing this debate. And we, like the Honourable Member, welcome the increased debate on black history in the curriculum. And I'd like to thank all members who have contributed to the debate. And we welcome the opportunity today to respond on this matter, as my right honourable friend, the member for Bognor Regis and Littlehampton, has done on previous occasions. This This country has a lot to be proud of, and children should learn all aspects of our shared history, both the good and the bad. We must teach about the contributions of people of all ethnicities, both men and women, that have made this the great nation that it is today. The shared history of our country is one that is outward-looking, a nation that has influenced the world and been influenced in turn by people from all over the world. It is people who have built the culturally rich country that we have today, a true example of a melting pot. And a great example of this was commemorated last Tuesday on June the 22nd, when communities across the country marked National Windrush Day. The third National Day celebrated and commemorated the Windrush community, and the nation paid tribute to the outstanding contribution of the Windrush generation and their descendants. The national curriculum enables teaching that includes black and ethnic minority voices and experiences, and a shared British history can and should be taught, whether it's events such as the Bristol bus boycott, many people have mentioned that today, which had a national impact, or the global impact of those soldiers from across the former empire who fought in both world wars. The theme, Ideas, Political Power, Industry and Empire Britain, 1745 to 1901, is statutory. I just wanted to make sure that was on the record. But the topics within the theme are not statutory. And we believe that schools and teachers should use the flexibility they have in the curriculum to develop a more detailed, knowledge-rich curriculum to teach their pupils in an inclusive manner. It is knowledge that works to unite people and our nation by revealing the rich interwoven tapestry of our history and enabling all pupils to see themselves in our history. It is positive that teachers in schools are responding directly to the renewed attention on history teaching, and these debates do help with that attention and to ensure that knowledge-based subject teaching, which has changed a lot, by the way, since many of us were at school. A number of members referred to their history teaching, and I think it's fair to say it's moved on a lot since then. Many more history teachers are reflecting the commitments in their recent survey of history teachers by the Historical Association to develop more content in their teaching on black and diverse histories. And this change at the school level will help pupils to have more breadth and depth in their understanding of history. Now, the government believes that all children and young people should acquire a firm grasp of history, including how different events and periods relate to each other. And that is why it is compulsory for maintained schools from Key Stages 1 to 3, and why academies are also expected to teach a curriculum which is as broad and ambitious as the national curriculum. The government has also strongly promoted the study of history to age 16 by including GCSE history in the E-back measure for all state-funded secondary schools in England. With the introduction of the E-back, we have seen entries to history GCSE increase by a third since 2010. The reformed history curriculum includes teaching pupils the core knowledge of our past, enabling pupils to know and understand the history of Britain from its first settlers to the development of the institutions that help to define our national life today. It also sets an expectation that pupils ask perceptive questions, sift arguments, and develop perspective and judgment. It teaches pupils to understand how different types of historical sources are used to make historical claims and discern how and why contrasting arguments and interpretations of the past have been constructed. The curriculum does not set out how curriculum subjects or topics within the subject should be taught, and we believe that teachers should be able to use their own knowledge and expertise to determine how they teach pupils and to make the choices about what they teach. Teachers have freedom over the precise details so they can teach lessons that are right for their pupils, and they should use teaching materials that suit their pupils' needs. At the same time, the teaching of any issue in schools should be consistent with the principles of balance and objectivity. We believe that good teaching in history should always include the contribution of black and minority ethnic people to Britain's history, as well as the study of different countries and cultures around the world. And the history curriculum has the flexibility to give teachers the opportunity to teach about this across the spectrum of themes and eras set out in the curriculum. To support this, the curriculum includes a number of examples that could be covered at different stages, drawn from the history both of this country and the wider world. Examples include at Key Stage 1, teaching about the lives of key black and minority ethnic historical figures such as Mary Seacole, who's been mentioned many times today, and Rosa Parks. The Key Stage 2 curriculum suggests that teachers could explore ancient Sumer, the Indus Valley, ancient Egypt, the Shang dynasty of ancient China as part of the required teaching on early civilizations. It also requires the study of a non-European society that provides contrast with British history. At Key Stage 3, as part of the statutory teaching of the overarching theme of Britain from 1745 to 1901, topics could include Britain's transatlantic slave trade, its effects and its eventual abolition, which could include teaching about the successful slave-led rebellions and challenges that led to the abolishment of slavery. For example, the Haitian Revolution, and in the UK, this could include the role played by slaves and former slaves such as James Somerset and the Somerset ruling, and Alado Equiano, as well as the abolition movement and the development of the British Empire. I will give way on that point.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way, and I realise this is not, she is speaking for a colleague at this moment in time. Would she say that it is fair to set the aspiration for her department that once all of these changes to the framework have gone through, that within a very short amount of time, that we should never ever have a student going through the entire educational process, as is happening right now, without ever having read a book or a text that has been authored by a black or non-white author?
Well, can I just say that, of course, we want to have a broad variety of reading in particular is very important, and a wide range of books are available now in all of our schools. I'm sure the Honourable Member goes into as many schools in his constituency as I do, and you see the broad range of books. But I do believe that, you know, we can't be taking away the teacher's role here, and the teachers, they want to be able to come up with their own curriculum, to be able to choose the materials. There's a broad range of materials. Obviously, we have the statutory themes, but within that, it really is up for teachers to be empowered, really, to decide at what point they teach things and introduce many of the black authors that we have now on the curriculum, but it's at what point they want to introduce that. And it certainly isn't for me to set out what all the teachers in our 20-odd thousand schools should be doing. In the theme Challenges for Britain, Europe and the Wider World, 1901 to the present day, the end of empire can be taught. And at Key Stage 4, the department sets out that GCSE history specifications produced by the exam boards should develop and extend pupils' knowledge and understanding of specified key events, periods and societies in local British and wider world history, and the wide diversity of human experience. And the GCSE in history should include at least one British depth study and at least one European or wider world depth study from the 3 specified eras. There is significant scope for the teaching of black history within these, and 2 exam boards, OCR and AQA, provide options to study migration in Britain and how this country's history has been shaped by the black and ethnic minority communities in the past. Pearson also announced a new migration thematic study option last year, which will be available to teach this September. So the sector is responding, and there are many organisations that support the sector with the production of these materials. And many of the issues discussed today are matters that can also be taught in other curriculum subjects as part of a broad and balanced curriculum. Pupils should be taught about different societies and how different groups have contributed to the development of Britain, including the voices and experience of black and ethnic minority people. Across citizenship, English, PSHE, arts, music, geography, teachers have opportunities to explore Black and ethnic minority history with their pupils, helping to build understanding and tolerance. We cannot shy away from the major part that this country played in the slave trade, and the children need to be aware of this and understand this. But the UK also has a tremendous history that we should be proud of, standing up for freedom and tolerance around the world. I will give way.
I thank her for giving way, and we have got a little bit of time to debate this issue. Does she not agree that a lot of the reasons why we are here and why we are debating this is that there is a profound sense of injustice that lives as a legacy of the injustices that have been committed in the past but continue to this day, which the people from ethnic minority backgrounds want to be debated on a moral basis? I speak from somebody coming from a German background. In my school days, the most atrocious inhumanities in the name of race have been committed by Germans. And we needed to learn that and feel the pain, the disgust, and the shame as what our people, my people in Germany, had committed. Isn't there a bit of that the people who are discussing this issue today want the British people also to understand and do?
Minister.
I find it very difficult to compare what we're talking to today to the Holocaust, if I'm very honest. But we cannot shy away still from the major part that this country played in the slave trade, and I do think it is important. Children do need to be aware of it, and I actually think a lot of the debate we're having, a lot of the discussions we're having, there's a lot of movement happening in this area, and I think teachers also are very much learning about new materials and embracing the opportunity to learn new materials as well. But you know, the UK does also have a tremendous history that we should be rightly proud of.
Mr. Chairman, can I just correct that I am not comparing the whole...
Order. Is the lady honourable from Bath seeking to make a point of order? She may seek to interview the minister. Does the minister wish to give way to honourable?
I'm happy to give way.
Sorry,
Hofhaus.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Chairman, but I want to put on the record that I do not compare anything with the Holocaust. Yeah. I do not compare anything with the Holocaust.
I think that's very good to go on the record, I agree. As I say, the UK does have a tremendous history that we should be proud of, standing up for freedom and tolerance around the world, from Magna Carta to our ongoing commitment to individual rights, civil liberties and freedoms. Our rich and diverse cultural heritage has been created by Britons from all over the world and has been globally influenced. And it is through this rich heritage of arts and culture that we continue to have instant global recognition, from Shakespeare to Zadie Smith. Black and ethnic minority Britons have played a fundamental part in our island story, from the Black Tudors to the Commonwealth soldiers who served with such distinction in the World Wars. And it is absolutely right that our current curriculum ensures that children have the opportunity to learn about them during school. I just want to turn to tackling discrimination and intolerance. A couple of the honourable members mentioned that. And on this matter, it was raised by a few people. I first want to say that there is no place for racial inequality in our society or in our education system. The Department for Education is absolutely committed to an inclusive education system which recognises and embraces diversity and supports all pupils and students to tackle racism and have the knowledge and the tools to do so. Since 2016, we have provided over £3.5 million to organisations, including the Anne Frank Trust, and to prevent bullying, and are currently running a procurement exercise to fund activity in 2021 and 2022 to make sure that schools have the right support in place to prevent bullying of all pupils, including those with protected characteristics. And our Preventing and Tackling Bullying Guidance sets out that schools should develop a consistent approach to monitoring bullying incidents and evaluating the effectiveness of their approaches. And it also points schools to organisations who can provide support with tackling bullying related to race, religion and nationality. And within and beyond their curriculum, schools are required to actively promote fundamental British values, including democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, mutual respect and tolerance for all those of different faiths and beliefs. In conclusion, I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for raising this important matter. I do welcome the opportunity to set out how Black history and diversity is already supported within and beyond the national curriculum, and I am confident that our schools will continue to educate children to become tolerant, culturally and historically knowledgeable citizens who embrace the values of modern Britain and whom we should be proud of. Thank you.
Chris Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. I think this has been a fantastic debate, and I want to pay tribute to all members that took part. In particular, I think the one thing that I've always felt about history, it's the story of people's lives. It doesn't, and they shared experience. And I want to pay particular tribute to the contributions from my honourable friends for Streatham and for Leicester East for two very moving speeches, I think, as well. I also want to, I hope the Minister will listen to what my honourable friend, the member for Manchester, Gorton, said, and about the pilot scheme that they are running there as well, around Black history and ethnic minority history as well. And I hope that that's something that can be rolled out across the country as well. I also want to pay tribute to the member for Orlick and South Perthshire for a very passionate speech. And I also want to thank the member for Bath as well for her speech about the way that they have directly taken on Britain's Britain's colonial past and the extremes that history has thrown up, and the bravery they've done in facing those things as well. I want to thank her as well, not only for taking part in the debate, but also the wider campaign she does within Parliament as well. I also want to end by paying tribute to my own front bencher, the member for Hove, in a very succinct, passionate speech, wide-ranging speech that brought everything into that brought everything in that encompasses Black history and the experience, not just of the ethnic minorities, but of the working class as well, in the last 30 years as well. And for him, I want to thank him for that. And I also want to end by thanking the Minister, the member for Chichester. I've known her since 2017 when we served together in the Public Accounts Committee. I know, and I want to thank her for stepping in the last minute in place of the Minister who should have responded. She gave a very constructive, informative speech. And to be honest with you, I was quite hopeful at the end of it that we can come to some arrangement with the government and actually bring this more to the fore within the schools as well. And I think really, if what she said in the speech, I think we really get this, and there's a consensus around this issue, and we can really improve the teaching of history. Ultimately, as I said in my speech, Mr. Gray, I am passionate about history. I am passionate about the way it's taught. For too long, it seems a dry subject, when really it can be brought to life because it's actually about people's lives and the lives they've lived. And I just really want to say this, that the importance of the way history is taught is more important than ever now. There are so many people who deny so much things happened in the past with the rise of fake news, but it's very important that we stick to the facts and everybody's voice is heard about their experience of growing up in the country that we call Britain. Thank you again, and thanks for everybody who took part, Mr. Gray.
The question is, this House considered E-petition 324092 relating to Black history and cultural diversity in the curriculum. May I say aye? On the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order.